offered in collaboration with the Canadian Mental Health Association, Algoma Public Health, Sault Area Hospital, and the John Howard Society, which is offered every Tuesday from 11:30 to 7 p.m. at the Canadian Mental Health Association storefront on Queen Street, has been reducing wait times. There are no wait lists or wait times. With over 1,700 people, children, youth, and adults accessing that service, demand remains strong. We would like to offer another day of service when funding is obtained. So, Mr. Mayor and City Council, please join us in the Awareness Week, May 6th to the 12th, by wearing green. I see you've got your ribbons on. Thank you very much. And we invite you to join many of our activities that week. We had a banner year last year with many activities, and we encourage you to come to activities such as our 4th annual Sky's the Limit Youth Concert at Cora this year on May 9th. This was featuring young people showcasing their talents and sharing their stories about mental health. Also, we have a 3-on-3 basketball tournament on May 11th at Superior Heights. That's our 2nd annual basketball tournament. We had such a great turnout last time, we thought we'd do it again. And many other activities that week. We do hope to see you, Mr. Mayor and City Council, at our events, especially the concert. In closing, we want the citizens of Sault Ste. Marie to know it's okay not to feel okay, and that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Let's get loud for mental health. Please join us in raising awareness about mental health, and no, you are not alone. We are all here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Juma. I have a proclamation for you. I want to thank the good folks at AFS. I know that you do a tremendous amount of really important work in our community. So there was 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental health challenges, while 1 in 3 parents in Ontario are seeking mental health services for their child. And whereas mental health is just as important as physical health in ensuring the healthy growth and development of children, youth, and young adults. Whereas mental health challenges can include addiction, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, conduct disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. And whereas many people who benefit from mental health and addiction services are finding easier access to service through the walk-in single-session counseling service available every Tuesday at the Canadian Mental Health Association office on Queen Street, and offered by Algoma Family Services, the Canadian Mental Health Association, Algoma Public Health, the John Howard Society, and the Sault Area Hospital. Whereas learning to recognize the early warning signs of mental health challenges and where to obtain necessary assistance and treatment gives families better opportunities to lead productive lives, as well as reducing the annual economic cost of $421 million attributed to missed work by parents in Ontario to care for children with anxiety issues. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim May 6th to May 12th, 2019 as Children's and Youth Mental Health Week and Mental Health Week here in Sault Ste. Marie. We encourage all citizens of Sault Ste. Marie to work together and raise awareness of the mental health and addiction needs in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Under agenda item 5.4, Day of Mourning, Drew Craig with the Sault Ste. Marie District Labour Council is in attendance.
Welcome to Council, Mr. Craig.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and community members. Each year on April 28th, we pay our respects to the thousands of workers who have been killed, injured, or suffer illness as a result of work-related incidences. As we honor the many families, friends who have been deeply affected by these tragedies, every worker has the right to return home safe and sound at the end of each workday. By working together, employees, workers, and our health and safety partners, we can prevent worker injuries and deaths before they occur. We invite the community to join us Sunday, April 28th at the GFL Memorial Arena meeting room on the ice level from 10:45 to noon.
Okay.
Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
We have a proclamation here for you. Whereas the National Day of Mourning is held annually on April 28th to commemorate workers who have been killed, injured, or suffered illness due to workplace-related hazards and incidents. And whereas the purpose of the day of mourning is to remember and honor those workers and to renew commitment to improve health and safety in the workplace. And whereas April 28th was chosen to be the National Day of Mourning as it coincides with the day in 1914 that the Workers' Compensation Act received its third reading. And whereas the Canadian flag on Parliament Hill will fly at half-mast and workers and employers across Canada will observe this day by lighting candles, donning ribbons, black armbands, and observing moments of silence. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, apologize. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 28th, 2019 as the Day of Mourning in the City of Sault Ste. Marie in recognition of workers killed, injured, or disabled on the job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion.
Further to that, we have a motion under agenda item 8.1 to endorse the objectives of Bill C-384 in principle. A motion by Councillor Scott and Gardy, whereas pensions are a major source of financial security for millions of Canadians, and whereas pensions impact a large number of residents of Sault Ste. Marie and continue to provide economic activity in the community, and whereas Bill C-384, introduced in the federal parliament during the 2015 to 2019 term of government, looks to improve pension protections for Canadian workers. And whereas many recent highly publicized pension plan terminations have created an uneasiness among Canadians who are receiving pensions, as well as those expecting to receive pensions. And whereas a pension is deferred earnings and failure to pay a pension is failure to pay earned income. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Sault Ste. Marie endorse in principle the objectives of Bill C-384, those being primarily the protection of pensions for Canadians, and urge the Government of Canada to further study and examine what pension protections could be put into place to give peace of mind to pension holders across the country.
Mr. Scott, do you want to speak to this resolution? As the mover of it, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the resolution is pretty straightforward in my mind. I think it's a very important piece of legislature that's facing. I think that given where we live and the reliance on pensions for our aging residents, that it's important that that doesn't get taken away from them. It's a security that they've earned and a security that they're relying on for both themselves and their families.
Mr. Gardy, do you have anything to add as the seconder of the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Duval, the Member of Parliament for Hamilton Mountain, was also City Councillor in Hamilton for a while, and I know that he spent a lot of his professional life working to protect workers' rights and for safe workspaces, and this is a continuation of that. I've met Mr. Duval a couple of times. He's a really good guy, and he's got a little connection to Sault Ste. Marie. His daughter Lori married a friend of mine that I grew up with and that you grew up with, yeah. Mr. Mayor. So I'm happy to put my name behind this, and I'm hoping that that it'll be supported unanimously by this council.
Councillor Shoemaker, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just further to those great comments, I had the great pleasure of talking with Mr. Kromptich today, former Ward 6 councillor, who endorses this resolution, and not only on his behalf, but on behalf of the 2251 and the Tenaris Union. The number escapes me at this moment, but they all support this bill, support the bill in principle, and certainly support the resolution to protect pensions in our community and elsewhere across Canada. So thanks to Corey and Matt for moving this motion.
Any other comments on the motion? All in favor? Motion's carried. You all have the opportunity to vote on your
I need Councillor Gardy.
So Councillor Gardy, you need to vote.
Okay.
You're good.
I got you.
Okay. Thank you. So Council, there are a few motions that are topical to the matters that we'll be bringing up as we get to them on the proclamations. So next we have 5.6 Catholic Women's League.
Betsy Currier, Diocesan President, Jane Chaput and Mark Hammond, co-chairs of the Convention Planning Committee, and Jerry Chateau, Publicity Chair, are in attendance.
Welcome to Council.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Provenzano and councillors, our annual Sault Ste. Marie Diocesan Convention for the Catholic Women's League of Canada will be held here in Sault Ste. Marie on April the 26th, 27th, and 28th. It'll be our 99th Diocesan Convention. Over 160 women are expected to attend, and representing 30 parish councils across 3 regions of our diocese, stretching from North Bay to Sault Ste. Marie and points in between. Our convention is held here in Sault Ste. Marie every 3 years. We plan on making this year a convention a memorable one for our city, with our wonderful hospitality, great food, exceptional talents, and fine accommodations. We respectfully ask the City Councilor to consider our request for naming the week during our convention as CWL Week. Thank you.
We will do that right now for you. Whereas the Catholic Women's League of Canada was founded in 1920 as the largest national organization of Catholic women in our country. Whereas the program of the League is one of giving and sharing, exemplifying the love of God and neighbor in the world. And whereas the League is organized, pledged, and eager to serve with citizens of goodwill for God and Canada. Whereas this organization has chosen to hold its 99th annual Diocesan Convention here in Sault Ste. Marie. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 25th to April 28th, 2019 as CWL Week in Sault Ste. Marie, in recognition of the outstanding work of this organization in our community and communities across our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
For all those at home that are listening, I apologize for all the sniffles, but I come down with a pretty serious cold. My mic is always on, so they're unfortunately listening to that.
Under Agenda Item 5.7, National Day of Action on the Overdose Epidemic, Connie Rayner-Elliott is in attendance.
Welcome to Council.
Good evening, Honorable Mr. Mayor and esteemed council members and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Donna D. Simon.
Good evening. My name is Connie Rayner-Elliott, and I'm here today to ask for the action on the current opioid crisis in Sault Ste. Marie. I'm the founder of a group called SOYA. SOYA stands for Save Our Young Adults from Drug Abuse. We're 1,500 strong in Sault Ste. Marie. A major part of SOYA's mandate is to ensure access to timely treatment to those in need. SOYA will remain vigilant against the awareness about the harms and poisons of drugs, including opioids and any other potential drug in our city. In Sault Ste. Marie, unfortunately, we have at least one Narcan overdose. What that means is that every day somebody's overdosing, and we think that we do have Narcan. We'd like to see Narcan be part of somebody's first aid kit. We promise to provide families of substance abusers with the information, skills, and resources to stay strong and safe. The deaths of our young adults from the ages of 15 to 24 are increasing at an alarming rate. SOYA promises to make it a priority to educate our young since during the youth and early childhood of the drug act, that's when they start experimenting with drugs. We will renew our commitment and provide safety, prevention, and education to all who require it. Our deep compassion is to help and further yield healthier lifestyles, more success for our citizens, and safer communities. We are in the midst of a serious countrywide crisis. We must all rise above from our moral outrage and when it comes to addiction and get beyond the blame so we can have somebody to live with quality and expensive care. We need to stop the stigma. Please help us to stop burying our youth.
April 16th marks the National Day of Action on the Opioid Crisis. The suffering and agony that has permeated our community because of this epidemic has gone on for far too long. Since September alone, at least 18 deaths have been attributed to fentanyl here in Sault Ste. Marie. Opioid overdose is now the leading cause of death for people aged 30 to 39 years old, with those in their 20s following close behind. This is unacceptable. We are sick and tired of burying our kids. Talk is cheap. The time has come to act. There are several issues we want the public to understand. The vast majority of opioid-related deaths are unintentional. So unbeknownst to the person using them, a variety of street drugs are tainted with lethal substances like synthetic fentanyl. They're not trying to die, they're being poisoned. Longtime users and those experimenting with substances for the very first time are all equally vulnerable. In this city, multiple overdoses are happening daily, and at least one of those is reversed by naloxone. When the person who uses drugs wants to stop and reach out for help, there are often no beds available in detox or treatment. Sometimes they will be released from detox only to spend weeks in limbo, waiting to be admitted to treatment facilities. Even with RAM in place, the wait list is often a week or more. And when these windows open up, death often follows. What we would like to see: an expanded, immediately accessible detox facility where people can remain as they wait for treatment. Increase in funding for RAM so that there is no wait for those who need help now. Request that Sault Ste. Marie be added to the list of those communities receiving a consumption and treatment services site. More government-funded treatment beds so that those without money or insurance can access help. Funding allotted for mental health and addictions counseling to address those with concurrent disorders. Increased supports for families who have loved ones struggling with substance use disorder. Better options for aftercare treatment, including assistance with securing safe housing and counseling. And we want to see naloxone kits available at all businesses, coffee shops, schools, and public buildings. So if you care and you want to help, this is what you can do. Learn to recognize and respond to the signs of overdose. Learn how to use and carry a naloxone kit. Educate yourself on harm reduction. Turn up the pressure. Contact your MP and MPP. Talk with your kids about substance use and misuse. Ask questions, be involved. Help end the stigma by the words you choose and how you treat those who are struggling, particularly if you work in a healthcare field. Speak up if you see people being disrespected because of their drug use. You see, addiction doesn't discriminate, so be kind. The person suffering today may be your child tomorrow. To learn more about what you can do, join us on May 5th at the Grand Gardens for our Family Matters Forum. Sincerely, Connie Rayner Elliott, Donna D. Simon, and the concerned members of SOIA.
Thank you. We have a proclamation that we've written to recognize the National Day of Action. More than 600 Ontarians died of opioid overdoses in the first 6 months of 2018, and there were 6,688 opioid-related emergency department visits in the province in 2018. Whereas Algoma had the second highest opioid-related deaths and hospital admission rates in the province of Ontario in 2018, and many people with substance abuse disorders face significant barriers in accessing treatment. Whereas the deaths of young adults from age 15 to 24 is increasing at an alarming rate. And a study from St. Michael's Hospital found that the rate of opioid-related deaths in Ontario has tripled in the past 15 years, with the most significant increase in young adults. Whereas we are in the midst of a national opioid crisis and communities across the country are participating in the National Day of Action on the Overdose Epidemic as a means to call attention to this issue and to combat the stigma associated with opioid addiction. Where City Council passed a resolution on April 23, 2018 that recognized the opioid crisis along with the challenging and important work being undertaken by the local healthcare providers, frontline workers, and the Drug Strategy Committee, and committed to continue to support that work. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 16, 2019 as the National Day of Action on the Overdose Epidemic here in Sault Ste. Marie. We have a number of two resolutions that are brought in support of this proclamation. I want to just recognize Councillor Dufour, Councillor Vezo-Allen. This proclamation came out of a forum that they hosted in Ward 2, where we met with Soya. They were part of that and participated, and I want to thank them for attending and speaking up.
Thank you.
And for bringing this day to our attention and for working with us to speak to the day and make sure it was recognized here in Sault Ste. Marie. So thank you for your care and commitment to our community. We'll read the motions and we'll go through them. We'll pass the motions now.
Under Agenda Item 8.3, Level 3 Withdrawal Management Facility Funding, a motion by Councillors Dufour and Vezo-Allen, whereas the Sault Area Hospital has applied for the capital and operating funds necessary to develop a Level 3 Withdrawal Management Facility project in Sault Ste. Marie, which would serve our community and the region. And whereas the Northeast Local Health Integration Network is supportive of the project, and whereas the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care has not yet approved the project, and whereas Mayor Provenzano provided a letter of support for the project on February 22, 2018, and Council received a presentation on the project on February 20, 2018, and passed a motion of support on the same date. And whereas there is a demonstrated and acute need for a Level 3 withdrawal management facility in Sault Ste. Marie to serve it and the region, now therefore be it resolved that City Council calls on the provincial government to immediately provide the approvals and funding necessary to build and operate a Level 3 withdrawal management facility, and directs Mayor Provenzano to provide this resolution to Sault Ste. Marie MPP Ross Romano, the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, and the Premier accordingly.
I think so. We have the motion on the table that I don't think the date of that letter is correct, but we can adjust that afterwards to the correct date. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Dufour?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to point out, in addition to what's in the motion, that this problem, given the latest provincial budget, will become even more acute in our community with some of the cuts to social services, the amalgamation of boards of health, the level of care that's being provided in Sault Ste. Marie is going to be less, and that makes me urge even more strongly that the province examine and approve the funding of this project, which is ready to go, has been in the works for over a year now. So I would just like to point that out.
Okay. Councillor Vezo-Allen, do you have anything to add?
I would just like to thank Donna and Connie for coming to both the Ward 2 community meeting and speaking up, and as well for attending tonight. And one of the takeaways from that Ward 2 meeting, and also to echo what Donna says, is, you know, we need to, as community citizens, learn to recognize the signs of someone who's having a drug problem. We need to be proactive, we need to work together, and we need to not discriminate or judge someone who's having issues with addiction. Addiction is a disease, and it certainly does not discriminate. And so I just want to thank both Donna and Connie and the entire Soya group for what they're doing. And certainly we're not the only community that is suffering due to this epidemic, and I think it's about all of us working together and doing what we can to educate and support, and also demand action from our governing bodies that can fund these sort of facilities. Thank you.
Any other comments on the motion? Councillor Gardy.
Thank you. So just to follow up on both the points of Councillor Dufour and Councillor Vezo-Allen, and the great words of our delegation this evening, we need as a community to do whatever we can to lobby the provincial government through our local member. And Mr. Mayor, you write great letters. And this motion is something that I support and we all support wholeheartedly. But I'd ask anybody watching today to spend a few minutes right after I'm done speaking to pick up their phone and to Google the phone number of our local member of provincial parliament and send them an email or call them in the morning, because nothing moves these people, nothing moves governments more than the people who elect them. So I suggest that if this is something that is important to you, if anything on this agenda that comes up tonight, and there might be a couple more that fall under this provincial government and the budget, that you pick up your phone, you pick up your keypad, and you get in touch with our local member of parliament, because we've been waiting on this for far too long. Thank you.
So I think Councillor Gardy makes a good point. Independent of my ability to write a letter, I think the community at large has to speak. I think you are. I think what I heard when I attended Councillor Dufour and Councillor Vezo-Allen's forum was a lot of people with a lot of very sincere concern and very legitimate concern. But what I saw was a tremendous amount of care, and I want to acknowledge that. We're spending a lot of time working with and supporting our frontline service providers and the infrastructure we have in the city to assist and support the people in our community that are struggling with mental health and addiction challenges. And frankly, the infrastructure is inadequate. It's completely inadequate, and we need assistance in building better infrastructure. But there's tremendous people in that infrastructure really doing a lot of hard work. But the people that we don't often speak about are all the family and friends and loved ones that are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So I want all of the people in our community, all of the people that are struggling themselves, and all of the people that are supporting and helping those people, I want them to know that we're aware and we care. And I hope that is a major takeaway from today, is that people know that we know there is a problem. We recognize it, we are working on it, and we care. Your community cares about you. And these people sitting around this table, the 11 of us with our staff, are doing what we can to improve the infrastructure and resources at our disposal. But that will get there quicker, and we will be more effective with your support. So I encourage you to reach out to and communicate with our other orders of government, both of them, and encourage them to support us supporting the community. So we'll call for a vote on the motion. All in favor? Carried unanimously. You all have to register your yeses, please.
Councillor Gardy, is yours coming up? Because I don't, okay. I'll
yes.
do manually for you.
So the second motion, Madam Clerk.
Under agenda item 8.4, amendment to Canada Post Corporation Act.
Yep.
Motion by councillors Dufour and Vezo-Allen. Whereas the opioid crisis has affected the entire country, including our own community and region, and whereas it has been established that drugs, including fentanyl, are being purchased online in both small and large quantities and shipped from countries such as China into Canada by way of Canada Post. And whereas the Canada Post Corporation Act 1981 has provisions that make it more difficult for police officers to seize such packages or intervene in the delivery of such packages than those delivered by another delivery service or a private sector courier. And whereas law enforcement supports the amendment of the Canada Post Corporation Act 1981 in order that they are better able to either stop, intervene in, or seize the shipment and delivery of illegal drugs through Canada Post more effectively and in the same manner as they could if the material were shipped by way of any other competing delivery services. And whereas from the Algoma Community Health Profile published by Algoma Public Health in September of 2018, it stated that there were 15 deaths due to opioid overdoses in Algoma in 2016, and the rate of hospitalization due to opioid toxicity were 45.7 per 100,000 people in Algoma in 2017, compared to 14.6 per 100,000 in Ontario. Now therefore be it resolved that Sault Ste. Marie City Council hereby supports the amendment of the Canada Post Corporation Act 1981 in order that law enforcement is better able to stop, intervene in, or seize the shipment and delivery of illegal drugs through Canada, and directs Mayor Provenzano to provide this resolution to Sault Ste. Marie MP Terry Sheehan, the Minister of Public Service and Procurement and Accessibility, and the Prime Minister.
Councillor Dufour or Vezo-Allen, would either of you like to speak to that motion? Councillor Dufour, please.
I'd just like to quickly add that Since Friday, we've received some communication from local representatives of Canada Post just expressing their support for this motion and their desire to continue to work collaboratively with police services in order to stop these shipments. And so I'd like to recognize that spirit of cooperation as well as we pass this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Yes, I would like to echo Councillor Dufour. We did receive communication from Canada Post that they support this. And I think this is, we need to, in looking for solutions, I think this is one of them, and they are certainly working in collaboration to do investigations and very open to this process. So I support this, obviously, 100% in helping us to get some less fentanyl on our streets than what we have right now.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the YMCA Healthy Kids. Item 5.8 on our agenda, Council.
And Todd Hawking, Child, Youth, Family and Aquatics Manager, is in attendance.
Mr. Hawking? Welcome to Council, Mr. Hawking.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. So the Sault Ste. Marie YMCA is a nonprofit organization that has been a very strong member of the community for the past many years. And our primary goal, if anything, is to build upon the community as a whole and as an organization. And we would like to send out a public invitation to everyone to attend on Saturday, April 28th for our Healthy Kids Day.
Okay. That's the extent of your presentation?
Basically.
So I have your proclamation. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie YMCA is a registered charity focused on empowering youth, families, and communities through a variety of programs that respond to everyone's needs, with a focus on inclusiveness and accessibility as a means to serve people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities through all stages of life. Whereas the Sault Ste. Marie YMCA aims to provide every individual in our community with opportunities for personal growth, civic involvement, and leadership development. Mirroring diversity and inclusion, the YMCA welcomes everyone regardless of their backgrounds, experiences, or circumstances. Whereas YMCA Healthy Kids Day is a movement to inspire and involve kids and parents throughout Canada in fun, easy ways to develop healthy, active lifestyles. The YMCA supports families in their efforts to teach children healthy habits and promote physical activity, preparing them for a brighter future. Whereas the Sault Ste. Marie YMCA is committed to fostering healthy lifestyles for kids and families, encouraging physical and mental play, and inspiring a lifetime love of physical exercise and activities that help parents think about ways to keep physically and intellectually active. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 28th, 2019 as YMCA Healthy Kids Day in the City of Sault Ste. Marie, and encourage everyone of all ages and backgrounds to participate in the special activities planned in celebration at the Sault Ste. Marie YMCA. Thank you.
Under Agenda Item 5.9, Foreign Trade Zone Point Designation Application, Dan Hollingsworth, the Executive Director of the EDC, and Nevin Bukonjic, Manager, Trade, Investment Attraction, and Community Marketing, are in attendance. And under Agenda Item 7.1.1, we have a motion by Councillor Scott and Vezo-Allen, resolved that the report of the Chief Administrative Officer dated April 15, 2019 be received, and that Council indicate its support of the Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation pursuing the designation of Foreign Trade Zone Point for Sault Ste. Marie.
Welcome to Council, Mr. Hollingsworth. We'll vote on the motion after you hear the presentation.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of Council, and the viewing audience at home, and those in the gallery here tonight. For those that don't know me, I'm Dan Hollingsworth, Executive Director for the Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation. Just before we get started with the brief presentation, I would like to thank CEO Horstman, who I see is not here this evening, for support of the Foreign Trade Zone Point designation and his assistance with the Transportation Infrastructure Task Force. Many of those members of that committee were quite instrumental in helping us develop the application to this point in time. The presentation this evening is the result of work supported through the city's contribution to Invest Sault Ste. Marie, and we kicked that program off back in 2015. Without the city's support, we've not been able to lever funds through FedNor and NOHFC to complete projects such as this. A special thanks to the team at FedNor for assisting us in the development of this work. They're very instrumental in guiding the work that we've done to date. I'm going to ask Nevin Bakonjic, the Manager of Trade and Investment for the Economic Development Corporation, to make a brief presentation about the Foreign Trade Zone point. And after that, if there's any questions or comments, we'll be pleased to answer those. So, Nevin.
Welcome to Council, Mr. Bakonjic.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to do a brief presentation to explain what a foreign trade zone is and what we're proposing to do. But before I start, I just want to preface things by saying all of Canada is considered a foreign trade zone. So the federal government has made 5 different programs available to businesses in Canada who import and export. And essentially all 5 services allow them to either defer or delay duties or taxes in some capacity. So what we're looking to do through EDC and Invest Sault Ste. Marie, we're actually looking to take things a step further. We're looking to get a federal designation as a foreign trade zone point, which I'll explain what that means exactly. So currently there's 12 different foreign trade zone points in Canada, including 2 in Ontario. That would be Windsor, Essex, and the Niagara region. A foreign trade zone point receives additional support from the federal government to access these programs and essentially creates a one-window approach to help businesses access the 5 different programs. We have developed a business case and a go-forward strategy, and I want to talk about why we're doing this. So we believe that an FTZ point designation will help Sault Ste. Marie to become a Northern Ontario hub for international trade. The creation of a foreign trade zone point task force, with the creation, new and existing businesses will have better access and support to these programs. So we'll essentially be setting up a task force that will assist businesses to access these programs instead of them independently going through government channels to try to access them. This will strengthen Sault Ste. Marie's positioning on the investment attraction map. Foreign trade zones are something that companies and foreign direct investment agencies look for when they're looking to locate companies. So this will, in essence, help us to attract further business as well as assisting the existing companies here involved in importing and exporting. The collaboration of the community's trade partners and activities will be assisted, including economic development, investment attraction, service providers, government, business, and industry. And it will provide a dedicated focus on facilitating trade through the community leadership. How do we intend to do this? Well, the first step is we've developed the business case. We've put it before our EDC board and have a resolution of support. Now we're here to get the city's support for that application. Following that, we would be obtaining letters of support from our stakeholders and partners towards our application. We would actually put together a formal application that would go to FedNor next month. Upon receiving word, we would create that FTZ point task force who would typically meet quarterly or as needed to assist those companies to access the programs. We would also organize a formal announcement with the government if we're successful. At that point, we would go out into the community to explain what these 5 programs are and how we're there to help them, the companies, access the programs. And of course, we would use that designation to help promote Sault Ste. Marie. So just briefly getting a bit more into detail, as I explained, all of Canada currently is a foreign trade zone. However, the designation goes a step further and helps to create that one window access of assistance to companies. And the government puts additional resources behind that. So we would get direct connections to Canada Border Services, to CRA, and other federal agencies who would help us to make the process smoother for companies. Additionally, we would go out, as I mentioned, to talk to companies as it currently happens, these companies are independently going through these programs to access the benefits of them. And also, many companies aren't aware of the programs themselves. So part of the process would be educating the business community and letting them know these programs exist and how we can help. So again, some of the key advantages for this designation would be the creation of this task force, which would be made up of economic development agencies, businesses in the community, agencies for the federal government, as well as some of the companies who are already working in the industry, such as customs brokers. So we would all come together to create this task force to assist companies. This would greatly improve our trade and promotion efforts. Again, to put this designation on our marketing materials and promote it through our Invest Sault Ste. Marie attraction packages. This would give us a leg up on some of the other communities across the country, as there are currently only 12 foreign trade zone points across the entire country. So some of our overarching goals, we want to become a Northern Ontario focal point for international trade. We believe this would significantly strengthen our trade for existing businesses in the community and the region, and we want to attract more business and investment to the community. In terms of governance, the task force would interface with the Economic Development Corporation. As well, the consultant has recommended or proposed creating a trade leadership network, which would be another advisory group who would sort of look at the broader trade and international trade issues and opportunities in the region. And that group also would interface with the EDC as well. And staff from the EDC would essentially provide the support needed to run this opportunity. The recommended task force would be made up of Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development staff, City of Sault Ste. Marie, FedNor, Canadian Border Services Agency, Export Development Canada, Canada Revenue Agency, potentially Transport Canada, Global Affairs of Canada, the Ministry of Energy, Northern Development and Mines, Sault Ste. Marie Airport, the International Bridge Authority, as well as some private sector players in the community as well. So it would have a really good solid background and which would provide a good opportunity to help these companies. The Trade Leadership Network itself that I briefly spoke about, again, would be that advisory group. Some of the same players would be on that group as well, but there would be additional community and business and industry players as well. So our next steps, we've completed the business plan. We've sought and gained the endorsement of the Transportation Infrastructure Task Force. We are organizing broader community support. We're here today to get the resolution of support from City Council. Also, we'll be moving to get those letters of support from our stakeholders. The next phase would be promoting the FTZ point, following, obviously, acceptance into the program. So we'd be looking to organize a formal announcement, developing marketing materials, promoting this designation, and getting out into the community to share the information. Phase 3 of this project would be leveraging the FTZ point designation. So forming that task force, integrating it into our marketing, integrating the FTZ point into our broader trade leadership network, engaging with potential marketing opportunities with Sault, Michigan, who we're already working with on a binational investment zone project. They also have a free trade zone in Sault, Michigan, so we believe it'd be a unique concept to have an FTZ on both sides of the border. And obviously undertaking monitoring and evaluation of the progress of the project.
Thank you. So Council, if you have any questions of the EDC, we'll start with Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank you very much for the presentation. I said it before, I'll say it again, I'm in support of anything that'll help drive economic development in Sault Ste. Marie. So I think, you know, on the surface, this is definitely something that we should pursue. I do have a couple of questions, though. One is recognizing that all of Canada is a free trade zone. Is there a limit on the number of points that the government is looking to establish? Is it unlimited as far as you know? And at what point does the whole designation almost become irrelevant if there are too many points, I guess is my question.
Right. Through Mr. Mayor to Council, I don't believe there's a set number. There currently are 12, and it is a process to get through. We see it as a key advantage for promoting Sault Ste. Marie. I'm not sure it would get to the point where it's meaningless, because the government does put additional resources, and in the past they've actually put marketing dollars, for example, towards it as well. But the federal government does indeed do additional promotion of those foreign trade zone points. So they essentially say, you know, these foreign trade zone points in Canada are ready to go. They have teams in place that can help assist business to further export and import. So I see value in doing this, and I don't think it would get to the point where it would be seen as not a good thing.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad that you you mentioned the additional support. That was my next question. This is obviously a great marketing tool. There's no doubt about it. And you had mentioned that the extra support that we would see from the federal government if we did receive this designation, is it primarily in the form of marketing dollars to help promote the area, or are there additional supports if we get this designation?
Through Mr. Mayor to Council, it's actually no longer marketing dollars, but it's actual support from the, for example, CRA and the Canadian Border Service. We have direct connections now to the people we would need to talk to, and they would participate on our task force. So when we helped companies to access these programs, we would actually be dealing or working directly with those agencies who are delivering the program.
So streamlining and cutting out some of the red tape and bureaucracy that would otherwise be.
Yes, and the companies wouldn't have to sort of go through this step to find out who to talk to.
Okay, I think I have two more questions if you'll indulge me. I realize it's a process and we're going through the application process. Does our specific location and the fact that we do have an international bridge bode well for the application? Is that considered in the application process, in the approval process, do you know?
Through Mr. Mayor to Council, I'm not sure if it's considered specifically. However, we do, the advice we've been given is to sort of cover all of our bases and make sure that the application makes sense for Sault Ste. Marie, to the point where it wouldn't make sense to turn it down.
It seems like it would, in that you mentioned that we'll receive additional resources, border security, et cetera, it's a border crossing because of the international bridge. I would think that because those resources reside at the bridge and elsewhere in the city, that would bode well for this application as well.
I believe that as well. I think it makes sense for us as a community, and it's something we're driving for, and through our application, it would clearly make sense that this would be a good location.
I just want to make one other comment, and you mentioned it late in the presentation about the connection with Sault, Michigan. Niagara Falls, Ontario, and New York have a similar relationship. I think it's important for us, and I'm glad to hear that we're working actively with them to create a much bigger presence, bigger footprint, to drive these kinds of initiatives. So I'm supporting this 100%.
Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Nevin. Question about this. So are there any other communities that are currently going through this application as well that you guys know of?
Through Mr. Mayor to Council, we're not aware of any others going through it right now, but there have been in the last year or so a couple of them that have been approved.
Oh, okay, that was actually my next question.
Yeah. So we did look at best case We looked at a couple of communities that went through the process and sort of talked to them about what the process was, some of the issues they ran into, and basically best practices.
Okay.
We tried to learn from them.
Were any of these communities in Ontario, aside from the ones that you listed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both Ontario communities we talked to, as well as Winnipeg.
Okay, good. That was all my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Nevin. In your business plan, so when you're taking a look at the foreign trade zone point, if you're comparing the traffic in Windsor, Detroit, and the volume of business, and I know that customs brokerages and warehouses are a booming business in both of those communities. In the proposed business plan that you have going, like what are sort of some of the residual businesses that you are putting into that plan that could happen here if we have that foreign trade point zone here?
Well, through Mr. Mayor to Council, the main focus is on helping existing companies to import-export as well as attracting new investments. So companies that would value the opportunity to have product come here, for example, from China, and they would be able to defer any duties and taxes until those products were either put into the Canadian market, or if they were exported again, they wouldn't pay any duties or taxes. So it's a value to a range of companies that are involved in import-export, including ones that are adding value to products and then exporting. So we just see it as another tool in our kit to assist business, but also attract companies here that would see it as a good location.
And just one more question. What would you be looking at FedNor to support? So you had in your application that you're going to be putting a proposal to FedNor. Is that to support ongoing what's happening at the EDC? Because this would be an initiative through the EDC, which obviously needs staffing and you know, all that, and obviously money to market and to allow it to come to fruition. So what would be involved in that FedNor application?
Through Mr. Mayor to Council, the application would be strictly to achieve the designation. Our consultant did put some figures together in terms of hiring somebody to manage the program going forward. We've decided that the EDC can run the program itself with current staff, or at least that's the plan. So the application through FedNor would be for the actual designation. We wouldn't be currently looking to access additional monies or resources.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Supported this matter when it got to the EDC board. Thank you for your good work on it. We'll support it here. If we can have a vote on the motion, all in favor? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Do you have me yet?
I am missing Councillor.
Now, I think we're going to move to the matters that I'm conflicted on, Madam Clerk.
That's correct.
If I can have Councillor Vezo-Allen, please. We have a delegation here on one of the bylaws, so I'll have Councillor Vezo-Allen up at the table, please.
Thank you. So with respect to 22 McDonald Avenue, there are two bylaws. The first, bylaw 2019-80, a motion by councillors, I've got Scott and Vezo-Allen, I'll change it to Dufour. Resolve that bylaw 2019-80 to amend Sault Ste. Marie zoning bylaws 2005-150 and 2005-151 concerning lands located at 22 McDonald Avenue, Rousseau and Martella be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
Council, do you have any questions or comments? Seeing none.
I think a point of order, perhaps, or a request to speak without prior notice.
At this point, Mrs. Harrison, because the other party is not here, we would not have you being able to speak from the gallery because the other party involved is not here to speak as well. So your request to speak is denied.
Okay, for the record, I would like to say that I had input from my neighbors and wanted an opportunity to speak about compromise developments.
Thank you,
I
Mrs. Harrison.
respect your
Yeah,
decision.
it's protocol, but thank you.
I'm waiting for Councillor Dufour. And, oh, Councillor Christian left the room.
Can I vote?
I can push it for you. Do you want to vote in the affirmative? Opposed? So it carries. I'm just going to change that seconder.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk?
And under agenda item 11.1.5, I will also remove you and put Councillor Dufour as the seconder.
Yeah.
It's resolved that bylaw 2019-81, being a bylaw to designate the lands located at 22 McDonald Avenue an area of site plan control, be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
From council, do we have any questions or comments? Seeing none?
Do you want to vote in negative?
Correct.
Motion carries. And there is another, it's a different subject matter, but it's also a bylaw that the mayor has a conflict on. That's at 11.1.9, bylaw 2019-85. It's a motion by Councillor Scott, and I will change it to 4. Resolved that bylaw 2019-85, being a bylaw to authorize an agreement between the city and 1972703 Ontario Inc. for the provision of a municipal capital facility at 1972703 Ontario Inc., Roberta Bonder Park, be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
Mr. Dufour?
Thank you, Ms. Acting Mayor. Yes, I do have a question here, and my question is directed to Solicitor Karen Fields. From my understanding of reading the report, it seems that we have a for-profit company who is renting real estate in a municipally owned building and then looking for a tax exemption as part of that agreement. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Now, after all that, can you repeat the question again?
I was just saying, from my understanding in the report, we have a for-profit company that is renting space in a municipally owned building and is looking to get a municipal tax exemption under that agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. As my follow-up question, I know we have a couple other for-profit companies that also rent real estate from the city. I'm thinking here specifically of the restaurant at the John Rhodes. Now, do they also have a exemption for their municipal taxes there?
They do not.
Okay. So I guess my concern that I'd like to share with the rest of my councilors is that I'm having a hard time personally seeing the rationale why we would give an exemption to one for-profit company while we don't have exemptions with others. And in this case specifically, I know that we are trying to spur use and development of this space, but my understanding when I voted for that rental agreement was that was why we gave such a low value to the rent. I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $500. And I personally am opposed to this because at the very least, I would like to see the agreement and the space run for at least a year before we can consider exempting the taxes. I mean, I think that we need to have just a much higher bar when we're dealing with a for-profit corporation to start handing out tax exemptions. So that's where I stand on the issue, and I will be opposing the motion.
Councillor Shoemaker, then Councillor Gardy.
Thanks, Councillor Dufour. Those are well thought out comments there. My question through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to the City Solicitor is what would be the difference here between this entity that's going to operate on the boardwalk and say the restaurant or the pro shop at the John Roads?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, the difference would be in how they are described under the sections of the regulation. So for example, the restaurant in the John Rhodes Centre would not fit within any of the criteria. They marginally might fit within the term recreation, but they are not for the purposes of the public or for the municipality. They're they're a profit center in a recreation center, whereas the facility we're speaking about only functions from May till September, possibly into October. The lease agreement said they're there for the tourist aspect of the regulation, so that people are in the Bondar area, or people from the ships that are coming through, they would have something to see and view, I guess, from a tourism perspective. They are also, so they're more for the tourism and for the public and for the municipality, whereas the restaurant in the John Rhodes Centre would not be, neither would the pro shop.
Okay. And through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Mr. Ver, how long is the lease for with this entity, the proposed lease?
It's Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. The lease initially was 1 year with the option to extend.
For how long in the extensions?
I believe it was 3 years. I'll double check that. I believe it was 3 years.
Okay. And through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to the City Solicitor again, would the exemption run for the entire term of the lease?
It would run until, if they were to stop acting in that capacity, then it would end. So it would run as long as they were still running that facility for the municipality for tourists. If I could also add that even if we agree to this evening, it still has to go through MPAC for final approval. So it could be that we see that there's the benefit, we agree to the taxation exemption. It could be that MPAC comes back and says, no, I don't agree with your interpretation. So it's not a final step at this point.
And I guess, I think there may be a question here, but I share Councillor Dufour's concern about this being, you know, very much similar to the restaurant in the John Roads. I'm not sure I completely agree with your interpretation on the distinction between them. But is there any way that, you know, if the lease came up for renewal, we could say, you know, we'll renew, but we're not exempting you from taxes anymore, kind of thing? Would that be an option?
For this this Beaver Tails?
Yes.
Yes, we could do that.
We could do that. Okay. I would, I suppose, hesitantly agree for the term of this lease, but I don't like the precedent that it's setting. But I would like to see a tourism attraction business take off in that space, and so for those reasons, I'll reluctantly support this time.
Anything else?
Yes, no, those are my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Gardy?
Councillor Shoemaker addressed a couple of my questions, actually. I have one. Councillor Dufour kind of alluded to it through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Mr. Ver. The company who's going to be working out of this space, they got a pretty good deal on the rent, yes? It's a good deal on the rent?
Through you, Ms. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, I would agree it's a good deal on the rent.
Thank
It
you.
really was to occupy the space and provide activity on the waterfront.
Much appreciated.
Councillor Bruni. Bruni.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess to Mr. Ver, what would the taxes be for this? How many square feet are we looking at? Would we know?
Through you, Ms. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I have not done the calculations on the taxes. Our city treasurer, I believe, has those numbers.
Michelle.
Through you, Councillor Bruni, through Acting Mayor Veslo-Allen, we've estimated them at this point to be about $3,800, including the municipal and the education portion. So the only impact to the city would be the municipal portion, which is about $2,800. It should also be noted that as part of that lease agreement with the vendor, I'd like, maybe Mr. Vera can confirm this, but I think through the agreement, the city is responsible for the taxes and not the individual. So that may make a difference in council's decision.
I guess a question to Mr. Ver, that's in the contract? And we're responsible for the taxes?
Through you, Ms. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I'm just pulling up the contract now, and I can confirm that.
I guess while Mr. Ver is looking for this information, maybe back to Michelle, if they're only renting this for approximately 6 months, 7 months, is the taxes for the for those months only being used or for the full year?
Through you, Mrs. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, the taxes are based on a full year that I quoted.
But the business is not operating for a full year. The contract is only for so many months, up to October, if I'm not mistaken.
If they are only renting for a certain period of time, then it would revert back to the city, is my assumption. I don't know if they would be responsible for the taxes as a whole, but like I said, through the agreement, I don't think they're paying the taxes anyway.
While Mr. Vera is looking for the contract, we could go to Councillor Nero if you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Either to Ms. Fields or Ms. Shells, as far as the precedent goes, do we have this exemption in place in any other part of our facilities?
We're just drawing straws here. To you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we do have several other agreements with municipal capital facilities. The Greyhounds are partially exempt at the GFL Centre. We also have the gym club at the John Road Centre that is also exempt, and I think there's another one at Strathclair for one of the organizations there. The Greyhounds probably have a similar agreement to this in that they are a profit-oriented business and they do receive partial exemption for commercial activities.
And I guess they would fit into the same category for the exemption as the business on the boardwalk, on the waterfront would.
They were exempt for, and I'll read you what was in the bylaw for them. The Sioux Greyhounds have been cooperating and working together to continue to provide a local cultural, recreational, and tourist attraction in order to encourage community cohesiveness. And that was the reason that was used for the bylaw for the Greyhounds.
So it's the cultural, recreational.
The tourist, the whole thing is.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
If I could add, through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero, the two other facilities that are under recreation are the soccer club and the baseball association. And that's because they're wide open fields where the public gets to use them and they carry on business for the municipality.
Okay, so Madam Mayor, I wanted to bring that up because I was concerned about a precedent as well. but as you can see from those answers, we have numerous agreements in place for the same thing. Thank you.
Welcome. Mr. Ver, have you been able to locate the?
Yes, I've, through you, Mrs. Acting Mayor, I have the agreement now, and it does not speak to the municipal taxes. It talked about sales taxes in the agreement, doing a search on the agreement. What it did refer to were, the tenant paying the landlord the rent, and that being the inclusive cost for the facility.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Bruni?
Thanks.
And just to clarify, it is for a 3-year term commencing May 2019, expiring September 2021. So just to address that, I said 1 year with an extension. It was a 3-year term initially.
Just a clarification.
I think Councillor Scott has a question, and then we can go to comments.
Thank you, Ms. Acting Mayor. Actually, my question was asked by Councillor Nero, so that's the direction I was going to go with. So I'm good, thank you.
Councillor Hilsinger?
Clarification to whomever. Are the taxes prorated over the 6 month, or over the year, or over the 6 month time period, or not?
To you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I'd have to confirm that. But if the lease term is only for a certain amount of months out of the year, my assumption would be that the city would be responsible for the taxes. But from what Mr. Ver has said, the lease agreement, the rent includes all costs, so that includes the property taxes, is my assumption.
So is there a reason that we need this bylaw to be considered?
I would direct that to Ms. Fields.
If, through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, yes, because they would have, I don't see the agreement as clear as Ms. Schell does. It just says the $500 plus the HST. So I think that if they're an entity that is earning money on that spot, they will attract taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have any comments from anyone on council? Councillor Dufour?
Yeah, just first off, I'd just like to say that I certainly support this business and their use of the facility. As stated before, my concern is just equity and fairness across all of our policies and how we approach these things. I certainly appreciate what staff has added in terms of context to the report. But just as a point of clarification, I'd just like to ask through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Mr. Ver. So if the lease is the lease for a 1 year or a 3-year term? So basically what I'm getting at, and I think what Councillor Shoemaker was getting at, is at what point will this lease agreement come back to council to examine both kind of the success of the business and how we want to look at structuring agreements going forward? Will that come back next year or in 3 years' time?
Through you, Ms. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, it is a 3-year term, so we would anticipate it would come back in 3 years' time.
Okay.
Any, Councillor Shoemaker?
Clarification on that point through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Ms. Fields. Is there any way we can set the exemption for a period of time and then have it come back, for a determination within the initial lease period? So, I may be comfortable with a 1-year exemption, but a 3-year exemption seems like a bit much.
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we could apply to MPAC for the 1 year, see what their response is, and then apply next year if we so choose again.
Okay, so this is an application that has to be done every year?
No, it wouldn't have to be. It could be declared that it is, for as long as the entity stays there and does the work that is captured by it. But if we ask to have it capped, we could ask for a 1-year consideration.
Okay, but is this not a term that the proponent is wanting, the person who's leasing? This is a term they want, that the taxes be exempt, correct?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to you, Councillor Shoemaker. I haven't spoken directly to this.
Looks like Mr. Ver maybe wanted to answer.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I believe it was really led through our staff and team and community services, looking at the rent that applied to the facility, and the agreement that covered it was all inclusive in terms of their cost. And looking at the opportunity to declare it a municipal capital facility and avoid the taxes enables the rent money to go directly towards, well, just pay for the rent of that facility.
I see. So it's not something that was requested per se, but something that your department's doing to realize the full benefit of those rent monies.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, correct. And I think it's really from the tenant's perspective, that was their kind of all-in cost for the facility.
Right. So nothing changes for them.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Do I have any other comments from council? I just, I have a comment. So I certainly appreciate the work that's been done with this, Mr. Ver and Ms. Fields. It is great to have the beaver tails on our waterfront. I think it's a great attraction. I just met with some boaters today. So a big chat about the fact that we don't have very little available on our waterfront is definitely an important aspect for them. And with having the cruise ships and that sort of thing. However, Beaver Tails is a for-profit franchise. So it is a for-profit business. And while I certainly can understand with the Sioux Gym Club being exempt, and if you take a look at the baseball fields in Strathclyde, those are all non-profit organizations. Greyhounds get a partial exemption, not a full exemption. So I would say moving forward, I think we need to be very cautious in how we set a precedent that if you are a for-profit private corporation, the tax burden should be yours, and we should be charging taxes. This is an all-in $500, which is amazing. You know, we want them to succeed. We want them to do well. But I think moving forward, we need to take a look at very carefully how we identify who is eligible for tax exempt and who isn't. And I think if you're a private for-profit corporation, then I don't think that you should be eligible for a tax break. But in saying this, it's sort of a moot point because it is a $500 all-in agreement. And similar to Councillor Shoemaker, I'm comfortable with a year, but beyond that year, I'm really not comfortable moving into 2 and 3 as well. So thank you. We'll bring it to a vote. Can we put that in?
Limit on, or is that understood by Ms. Fields?
Yeah.
It's not specifically mentioned in the...
No, it's not. So I would amend the bylaw and add the comments that are made for the 1 year.
For the 1 year.
Okay.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon?
Are we deferring this procedurally?
Do you want to defer it till we get the amendment?
Sure, we'll do it for a moment.
Thank you.
I think you were done anyway. The mayor will be.
Where is the mayor? Yeah, we're going to change the bylaw.
Yeah, it's not specifically articulated, so the bylaw will be amended, and so we've marked the bylaw as being postponed.
Thank you.
Then we'll move to consent.
Madam Acting Chair, if I have one moment, please. I think it's point of privilege and the indulgence of the very busy. Councillors, before I leave, I really apologize to city staff because I do have in my notes a very sincere thank you to the staff. They have answered so many questions which I forwarded from my neighbors. They treated all of us with patience and respect and answered all of our questions very promptly. And I'm sure to them, some of our questions were probably a little silly because we really don't understand how things work. I found this building to be a very welcoming place, and I have learned a lot. So my most sincere appreciation to staff. You do a lot of work, and I'm sorry this happened at budget time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison, and please be advised that all of council did receive your correspondence.
I'm sure it was trusted to the clerk. He would see to it.
Yeah.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we can continue.
We'll move to consent.
Yeah, we're on the consent agenda. Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of matters that are tied together. One of them is future SSM project update, 6.13.
We have Mr. Anderson here too, so Mr. Vera and Mr. Anderson can answer any questions you have with respect to that.
The other is, and that's the one that's linked to this one, I think is it the year-end financials where we have the surplus detailed in there?
Yep.
Yes.
It is.
Okay, 6.11.
6.11 and 6.13, yeah.
So if I could have your indulgence, so there's a question in here, but it will take a bit of comments before. We will all recall that the provincial government cut the NOHFC commitment that they had made to future SSM to the tune of 1.4 million a few weeks ago, and we are all sorely disappointed in their decision in that regard. And we are grateful to staff for having brought back a future SSM update on how they intend to proceed with less funding, in fact, no funding from our provincial partners, and only the municipal and federal portions being allocated to the project. So 1.4 million was cut from the project. Our surplus this year is 1.3 million. So I am wondering if there is some way we can, and I know we have a surplus policy. I was in fact the one who asked staff to develop a surplus policy last term, and I think it's been a great tool for us. But I do find these circumstances to be exceptional in that we had a funding commitment that has been pulled. And so my question to Mr. Ver, to Michelle, or to you, Mr. Mayor, is, given the exceptional circumstances, is there a way we can allocate this surplus funding to future SSM so that we can, as a municipality, commit to the future of Sault Ste. Marie, where the province has clearly seen no merit or frankly dropped the ball?
So I'll start an answer, Councillor Shoemaker, and if you find it adequate, that's great. If you don't, we can go to the treasurer or the deputy CEO for that portfolio. So when we lost our funding, we obviously huddled internally. First thing we did, and you're all aware and you support it, was commit to the project and say we'll see it through. And we looked at funding sources and potential funding sources. At the time, we did not know what our surplus would or would it be. We certainly didn't expect it to be 2.8. But at the time, we didn't see that as an available source of funding because A, we didn't know the quantum of it, and B, there's a surplus policy that, you know, we thought funding would flow that way. But when we looked at where else we could try and pull funding from internally, one of the things that we came back to, and one of the things that Mr. Vera and I talked about, and he can speak to this, is in a way, if we are to strip something else we're doing or take the money from any other pot, in some degrees, we're going to be letting our provincial partners off. One of the things they did say to us is, look, we're not saying your project isn't good, come back to us again. And we fully intend on going back and again and again and again. And every time we go back, if we get a no and if something's really important, we'll come here. So I think our feeling is we don't want to say to the provincial government, we're not going to try and get you to support this project in the future. We want to leave that door open. And if the team comes to something and has a good project and we go to the province and ask for their support and they say no, I think the natural step at that point would be come back to this body and say this is really important to our community. We'd like you to consider funding it in lieu of the provincial government funding it. So council could certainly allocate whatever funds they see fit. You have the discretion to allocate the funds from the surplus policy if you see fit, but it wasn't an ask that we were conceiving of making of council. It was something that if we determined as we go through the project we need specific funds for a specific project that we couldn't get from any of our other levels of government, we would come back here and ask you to support it. So I hope that's clear. That gives you a sense of what we were thinking. I can have Mr. Ver or Mr. Anderson add anything if they'd like. Mr. Ver?
Councillor Shoemaker, certainly appreciate the support, and we obviously believe, and you can see from the report, there's great work being done by the future SSM team. I would agree that I think what we can do moving forward, as you can see when we reprofiled the project, we did have some variance in terms of the project staffing line item, and the bulk of the money did come out of the consultants and marketing line item. We still have some funds there, and so what I'm hoping we can do is as the mayor suggested, we can hopefully cross the bridge where for each individual project we have a feasibility study or business case done, and then we can approach the province and hopefully have them involved on an individual project by project basis. And if that doesn't happen, then we would have to come back to council and state where we are with the project and how we would like to proceed with it at that time.
Now, you mentioned, and just for a point of clarification, you mentioned the bulk of the funding has come out of the quote-unquote consultants and marketing budget. I know consultant can be a dirty word in politics, but is it not true that these studies are in fact sort of the basis on which we make our decisions? They give us the facts and the evidence that we need to rely on to make our decisions. Is that not correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is correct. And depending on the project, obviously we have the 4 pillars within the future SSM project. We have a number of action teams working on those projects. There are different partners involved in those projects and different types of projects occurring. So with each one now, we're just approaching it a little differently in terms of how we're kind of funding that initial chunk of work to get done in order to provide a full business case or a full feasibility study that we can then bring forward.
Okay. Yeah, I would just emphasize and encourage, the team, the future SSM team, to come to council when there is a need, because obviously this is not operational funding. This is one-time funding for future SSM, so it doesn't impact tax rate. And so any funding that is needed because of a provincial government shortfall, I would much rather see provided rather than having the project scaled back, because this is in fact a community plan that has been developed over a couple of years, involving consultation with, I don't know if it's hundreds or thousands of stakeholders. So it is something that our community believes in, that our council has endorsed, that the federal government has endorsed, that the provincial government had endorsed and has subsequently unendorsed. And so, it's something that has support behind it, and it would be a shame to see it not reach its full potential just because of the short-sighted decision of the provincial government.
And I appreciate those comments, Councillor Shoemaker. We won't let that short-sighted decision affect it. We're going to make sure it reaches its potential. And it might very well involve us being back here in the future with an ask. On that note, so let's just stay with those 2 items. So 6.13, anybody else on 6.13? Councillor Gardy.
First off, the report's great, and I think however it can be disseminated for people in the community to access, I encourage that very much. That said, in the quarterly report, there's some talk about film and some of the good news from 2018. Could Mr. Ver speak about what we could expect for 2019?
Maybe we'll get Mr. Anderson to speak
Oh, sorry.
to that.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to what our hopes are for this year, specific to film, we're definitely seeing some really good turnout so far. We've had Tainted just concluded its production here. We saw a really positive impact in terms of close to 1,200 room stays at the local hotels and close to $800,000 in terms of investment into the community. We've got another film that's currently looking at the community as we speak. We're very hopeful that we'll be able to track that here. And then we have a handful more that are looking at filming later in the year. So, you know, obviously it's a process that involves, you know, it's a competitive process. We have to be competitive against the other jurisdictions. So we are looking at how we streamline our process for film to attract more of them here. And also working with, you know, the Downtown Association and others to make sure that we have beautification and all of our amenities well laid out for those producers that are coming for familiarization tours. But we're very hopeful that we will attract these films.
Thank you. Another question, please, on the labor force development. Mr. Ver, in the report, it talks about fairs and events that that members of the group will be attending, and that some employers are participating. Could you, just to tease some of the highlights out of this for the public, could you elaborate on that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, yes, happy to do that. Through the work of our Labor Force Development Coordinator, he's met with a number of the employers in Sault Ste. Marie, and right now we actually have a list that's on the Future SSM website with 130 professional jobs in Sault Ste. Marie that are currently available across multiple employers. So we're really working on three prongs in terms of our recruitment strategy. One is to you know, obviously retain our youth, promote those jobs locally in Sault Ste. Marie. We are going to attend 2 job fairs in Toronto over the next couple of days that our Labor Force Development Coordinator has coordinated to attract people to Sault Ste. Marie. And then also while we're down there, we're meeting with the folks from the Sioux Network in an effort to try and repatriate people back to Sault Ste. Marie, which I know is near and dear to Councillor Christian's heart. And so, again, I think for the community really to recognize, if you go to the website, you'll see 130 jobs that are available now. These are like high-skilled professional jobs in the community. It presents a tremendous opportunity to repatriate people back to the community and also bring newcomers to Sault Ste. Marie.
And I don't want to ask another question about the report, I apologize. Could you just list a few of the employers that will be traveling down to attend with you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, yes, we have Algoma Steel that will be there. We have Sioux Area Hospital, JD Aero, Ecom Timber, McDougall Energy, Ontario Lottery and Gaming. And then on top of that, the staff from the Future SSM team are also representing a number of the other employers that have postings that are available. So there's 9 employers total going down as well. We'll be representing other employers there with jobs at the job fairs.
Thank you.
You forgot me.
I beg your pardon?
I'm going down too. They asked me to go with them. Yeah.
Oh.
And perhaps most importantly.
Travis wouldn't have forgot me. Okay, so anybody on 6.13? Councillor Vezo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to probably Mr. Anderson. Great report, Mr. Ver, great report. Thank you so much. My question is more to the Global Friends initiative that you're doing, and as far as determining that at the Sioux Community Career Center that Global Friends was the best fit for, you know, for youth. Have you found that, and it's very general, I mean, it is refugee youth, marginalized, racialized, youth with disabilities, Indigenous youth, or LGBTQ youth, intergenerational youth on social assistance. So how has Global Friends, through the Social Equity Committee, been able to connect locally with all these groups that you have described? And you're also describing a safe space. So is that a virtual space? Is it a bricks and mortar space? So if you could elaborate.
Councillor Vezo-Allen, I'm gonna stop you because this item I'm being told is gonna be pulled from consent.
Is it? Okay.
So not the report. So you're asking about another, it's relevant to the report, I think.
Yeah.
But you're asking about a specific item down the agenda,
Correct.
which has to do with a contract that's being tendered.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
gonna be pulled. So why don't you, any discussion about that contract, we can deal with when we off consent, because that's gonna be dealt with
Okay,
separately.
I'll reserve it for then. Thank you.
Anybody else in future Sault Ste. Marie? I'd just like to recognize the good work. I think we can all be proud of the work. I think we can all recognize that it's really positive, and I'd like to just reiterate Councillor Gardy's comments. It's really important that we get the work out there. So, and this is one way of doing it, but as much as we can try and get people to see what we're doing, I think it's positive. So, we'll go to the other matter Councillor Shoemaker raised, just to knock that off consent, 6.11, which was the surplus, this year's surplus. We can deal with that one now too. Any questions from councillors on that? Okay, so any other matters on consent? Councillor Dufour. Oh, sorry.
Item 6.14, the mill market update. My question is to Mr. Vare. Mr. Vare, I was wondering, can you speak to some of the steps that the city has taken to ensure that the new not-for-profit board is not encumbered by any conflict of interest by being entirely vendor-run? Kind of what I'm looking here specifically is to just learn about how is it that we will be canvassing for community-based board members?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Yes, we've had a number of discussion with the vendors at the mill market over the last couple weeks. And we have, I think, a path forward which would see a not-for-profit established that would have a mix of community interest members and vendors on the board. As you said, it would be good to really, what we tried to do with the group that's forming the nonprofit is look at good governance models, coming up with a matrix of skill sets you want around the board table in order to operate a not-for-profit. I believe we have agreement on that now, and so the board that will be assembled will be one that will be, again, a mix of generic community interest members with skill sets needed to operate the not-for-profit and vendors. As well, we've been working with the vendors to look at the bylaws of the organization and how board members would be appointed to the board and the regulations and rules around the market to make sure people have an opportunity to have input and provide a solid foundation for the not-for-profit going forward.
Thank you. And just as part of a kind of a follow-up question that looks more at the long-term issue, will it be part of the mandate of the new board to basically undertake a good faith attempt to integrate the other not-for-profit that we have in Sault Ste. Marie also running a farmer's market?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, that's certainly something that we hope will happen with the new not-for-profit, to be able to reach out and that was even a recommendation from Roger Brooks when he did our downtown review to say you have two markets. I'm not sure why, probably you need to have one. So that's something we want to pursue with both those organizations and see if something can come about there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Vare. I think that having one not-for-profit to deal with will make things much simpler if any applications for EDF funding or anything else do come to this this body. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Shoemaker, I'll come right back to you, but on the same, you're on this matter? Okay, go ahead, and then, yeah, Councillor Vezo-Allen and Councillor Shoemaker on this matter.
Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Vare, regarding the bylaws and the incorporation, you have a date of May 18th that you would like to see all of this completed. So being involved for as long as I have in the nonprofit world, forming a new organization can sometimes take, a little bit longer. I know that it's not firmly in place yet and that there needs to be time for consultation with all the vendors. So is there a plan in place if we do not have a completed not-for-profit formed by May the 18th so that we have no interruption of market operations.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vesuelen, yes, when we were looking originally at the transition of the market, that is something that city staff talked about. In the event that we weren't able to get a not-for-profit up and running at all, and there was a transition period, you know, we talked about the city being able to ensure operations of the market in that interim period. And we've spoken with our legal department insurance about the different ramifications of that. So I think we do have a contingency plan in place should things not be set up. Our hope is, though, we can still continue with that goal towards May 18th.
And just one last question. So staff will ensure that all vendors are notified for the bylaw review to guarantee that there's 100% knowledge and participation of existing vendors in feedback of those bylaws.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vesuelen, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ver.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Ver. So there's 25,500 in provincial offense fines, which I understand stem from building code violations.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that's correct.
And so if the city takes over, well, we own the building, but if we take over as the landlord per se in this scenario, is the plan to operate from this building, the old fish hatchery building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is correct. We've met with our building folks here to look at the infractions, and a lot of it relates to, or some of it relates, sorry, to activities that were taking place in the market that, you know, if they were to continue, significant upgrades would have to be made. If those activities stop, then the market would be okay. So we'll work with the new not-for-profit to make sure what we're doing there complies with the current infrastructure of the building and enables us to continue without significant upgrades.
Okay, so my question, and I think you sort of somewhat answered it there, is the building safe for the operation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes.
And I guess, how have we, I see that they have advised us that that they haven't earned enough revenue to pay the taxes, but how have we determined that that's in fact so? Like, have we checked their books?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that's one of the agreement points in this deal, is that they will provide the financial information. We have taken it at, I guess, face value up to this point that has been the case based on their experience. And I know previously staff working with them have had the similar message about the state of finances when they've been in discussion with them. But they've agreed to share that financial information with us, and that's going to also help the not-for-profit setup as they move forward.
And so if they haven't earned enough revenue to pay taxes for 5 years, or how can we realistically expect that they're going to be able to pay the balance of $50,000 in 6 months?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we have the commitment from the members of the Mill Market Incorporated that they will provide those funds.
Okay. But I'm not sure that answers my question. If they haven't been able to for 5 years, how can we trust that they'll be able to in 6 months?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, the agreement does provide that they would provide the checks upon signing for the agreement, and we'll certainly make all efforts to collect those funds if those aren't available.
Okay. So what kind of efforts would those be if the checks, let's say the checks bounced?
Well, Councillor Shoemaker, I think we're getting, I mean, I think you're asking staff to speculate on, like, look, if the party we're dealing with makes good on the commitments, we're okay.
Right.
If they don't, then we would have a decision to make on how we proceed, on how we pursue that. If we do pursue it, you're aware of all the different avenues you would use to pursue that. They would all be legal avenues.
Right. I guess my trouble is going from the analysis undertaken to the conclusions reached, which is that the analysis is they haven't been able to pay us for 5 years, and the conclusion is we're going to get half of what we're owed in the next 6 months.
It might well be that we don't.
Right.
The reality is the lease is expiring, and our main focus is the preservation of the market on a going forward basis. So that's what we've been preoccupied with. If we don't recover on the previous lease, then we will either walk away from that, or we will either take kind of the regular legal steps to try and recover on it. There'll be contractual obligations that we can action if we so choose to action.
Right.
From my perspective, the preoccupation was with ensuring that people continue to get to go to the market, because people really love going to the market. And we've always just been trying to find a solution where that's going to be the case. And if that's the case and we ultimately don't recover, it's going to be lost revenue, but we weren't collecting it to begin with.
Right. Okay. So we did have some questions come in today with respect to what's included in the IP and where the value comes from for that 50,000 that we're crediting them with for items that we're receiving from them, including intellectual property. So how do we determine those values?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we visited the mill market. We went through the property with the owners, and we looked at the equipment that is there now that would be transitioning to the new not-for-profit. So there's a number of vendor tables, picnic tables, walk-in freezers, et cetera, that are there that will come over. The IP relates to specifically the mill market in Sault Ste. Marie being able to continue to use the mill market name, as well as the social media assets that have been developed, the Facebook page, and there's, I think, roughly around 10,000 followers on that page. There's a website that's attached to mill market, so there's a couple of items there that would come over as well with the not-for-profit. So it's the combination of those physical assets and those soft assets that have been invested in by the operators of the mill market.
And does it include those huts or kiosks that are used kind of as outdoor vending markets?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, no. Those are owned by a separate corporation, so those are outside of this arrangement.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. Anybody else on that matter? Seeing none. Councillor Shoemaker, did you have any additional matters in the consent agenda?
No, I was just also going to ask that 6.6 be pulled.
6.6 is the development of a post-secondary new economy strategy. Okay?
Yes.
So we're pulling 6.6 and 6.7. So council will reserve questions on those to when we get to them off consent. Any other matters in the consent agenda? Councillor Dufour?
Yeah, sorry, 6.24, the Prince Township Agreement for Building Inspection Services. My question is to either Mr. Posbon or Mr. King. I'm just wondering, how accurately are we capturing the cost of providing these services? In the report, it listed some numbers from 2014, but I didn't see updated numbers in the report. Are they in the bylaw?
So can I have one of you two attempt to answer that question? So the question was, how accurately are you recovering the costs?
Yes.
For the services provided?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, I understand that number is 28,000, and that's because it's now being processed through the fees themselves.
Okay.
The agreement previously was done through a figure of $7,000 flat. That's
Okay.
in the previous agreement.
Okay, and so the figure of 28,000, that's just on a permit fee basis? There's no cost center for kind of the savings in administration or anything like that?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Dufour, that's correct. So it's done on a fee basis exclusively now.
Okay, and are the fees that are being charged at the same level and same rate as those being charged to residents of Sault Ste. Marie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor to Councillor Dufour, that is correct.
Okay. Has there ever been any discussions or considerations about capturing the cost of the administrative overhead in running the department through this arrangement?
Maybe best answered by Mr. Posmont.
Okay, no problem.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufort, it acts as the same service level that citizens in Sault Ste. Marie go through. So all those cost centers are all built into that index level on Schedule A for the permit fees.
Okay.
They would use the same one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else in 6.24? Councilor Nero, did you have your hand up in 6.24? No? Councilor Dufour, are you done? Your matters of consent? Councilor Nero? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 6.22.
Okay, that's city laneway cleanup cost recovery measures.
See if I can, Mr. King, firstly, let me say thank you for the report. I just wanted to confirm, does the report assure that if we submit a request for a laneway cleanup, that Public Works will clean it up automatically, and if we can, or if we are able to charge someone for it, then we'll go ahead and do that after?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, what the report captures is that we do have the ability to collect should there be a situation where we could identify the individual. We can then put that against their taxes for whatever cost of cleanup. In practice, there may be garbage that's left behind that's just easier to be picked up by whoever's out in the field at the time. But essentially the wording is there that would allow us to put that against their taxes. If there is a request and we can't identify, we could definitely go and proceed and collect those funds for that cleanup.
But, excuse me, basically, Mr. King, this is the status quo, correct? Nothing has changed. The report pretty much identifies what we do today. Correct? I'll go that far with the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that is correct. Essentially, it's a tool that we have currently that is in place.
Okay, maybe I guess my next question, thank you, Mr. King, I'll address it to Mr. Girardi. Through my experience on these kinds of calls, especially in laneways, we refer to maintained laneways and unmaintained laneways. It's been my experience in the past that if we submit a request for an unmaintained laneway, sometimes the cleanup is done, sometimes it's not, because of that fact that it's an unmaintained laneway. Am I correct in that so far, I guess?
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, but keep in mind that if it's been identified that someone is throwing the garbage directly over the fence into the laneway from their place, it can be identified now and legal can take action. If it's just garbage that's thrown somewhere in the laneway or just left behind by someone passing through, and it's accumulated that much, of course, we're going to have to take the initiative to clean it up. Do I always get to it? We can't make everything a priority. So we'll get to it when we can, obviously.
Okay, so the part of the resolution, the motion that we passed, and one of the whereases was specifically the one that I wanted to get addressed through this, was whereas it is not in the city's best interest to leave the debris and garbage to accumulate in city laneways. I guess that's addressed. We're going to pick it up. It might not be tomorrow, but sometime we're going to pick it up.
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I want to be clear on what non-maintained laneways are, because I don't want when grass grows and trees grow and brush grows to be considered garbage. So if we're clear that we're going to be removing the garbage out of there, that will be something that we'll be working closely with legal to address.
I agree with you 100%. The motion was addressed specifically, and I guess the term when we use the word garbage, it kind of, we need to expand that, because the garbage and debris usually were items, bigger items like tires that are not needed any longer, mattresses and things like that, not actually house garbage that's in green garbage bags thrown over a fence in the laneways. It's usually those bigger items. And it happens in those unmaintained laneways where I agree with you, unmaintained means we don't cut the grass, we don't scrape it down and if people have to drive on them or whatever. So I guess the assurances that were asked for through the motion, through the resolution, were that if they are those kind of items, that we're going to pick them up and then we're going to see if we can find out who put them there and make the charges if possible.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Nero, and I can't stress enough, there will be charges because we don't want to make this a free-for-all and everybody start dumping their garbage in laneways and thinking that we're just going to go around and start picking up garbage all over because that will not be the case.
I agree with you 100%, and we had that discussion at the time, and I certainly don't want that to happen either. But I think that the assurances that we were looking for, that there was going to be some action, and I think the answer is what I got tonight. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else on that item? Seeing none. Those your items, Councillor Nero?
I'm good, thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, any new items, Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this for my own items?
No, your own items. Yeah.
Okay. 6.4 and 6.10.
We'll just start with 6.4.
Okay, so actually not sure who to direct this question to.
Just ask it and we'll get the right person.
Perfect. So the question is, so it mentions that it's single sourcing, and I understand why it does mention it. Given that this is Microsoft software, and I did some research on this, you can get it right from Microsoft, and they do offer software support. I was wondering why we continue to choose to go with Diamond Software Inc. Is it that they're offering some extra support that Microsoft doesn't, or is it just we've never looked elsewhere?
We'll start with Michelle, and if we can have the treasurer's microphone, please.
To you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Scott, this is our financial software, and the vendor tailors the Microsoft product to municipalities. So that is why we go with them. That is the product that we're currently using, so we wouldn't get the same support if we went to just a generic Microsoft.
So Microsoft wouldn't be able to tailor it to municipalities themselves?
I don't think they offer it. This is a very specific product. There's a lot of different vendors that are out there that will take that Microsoft Great Plains product and they'll do their own enhancements and tailor it to a certain industry, whether it be the health industry, municipality, schools, etc. So this is the vendor that we chose, and we have all of their tailored software in our system, so we wouldn't be able to get the enhancements and the same level of support from a generic.
And is this something that we'd be able to undertake with our own internal IT department? I know we're stretched pretty thin in that area, but just would they have the capabilities of tailoring the software if we purchase the software right from Microsoft?
No, we do not have the capability, in my opinion. That's why we went to that whole IT review, and we used to do it in-house when we had COBOL programming, but by going to an external software, you've got best practices as well as a whole community that is participating and providing enhancements to the software.
Great, thank you. That was everything.
Okay, anybody else on that was 6.4. Anybody else on 6.4? No, go ahead, 6.10.
Yeah, so for 6.10, just pulling this up here. So
That's the tender for asphalt.
once again, I'm not sure who to direct this toward, but it might be Mr. Elliott. It does mention meeting specifications as part of it, and I was just kind of curious for asphalt, and maybe it's just because I don't know. What are these specifications? Is it like a certain longevity? Is there a certain time period? Like, I'm not sure. I just wanted some clarification on that.
Mr. Mayor to Councillor Scott, there are Ontario provincial standard specifications that are set for asphalt quality. There are different mix designs for different applications, so the contractors are held to that. We approve mixed designs based on tests at the beginning of the year, and we test asphalt as it's placed, and if it's not acceptable, it needs to be removed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else in 6.10? Seeing none, those are your matters. Councillor Gardy.
6.8, tenders for equipment, through you to Mr. Girardi, real quickly. The list of those pieces of equipment that we're looking to replace, any of those that were on that list damaged this winter? Or were they a list that was already kind of in the works?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, annually we put a team together to put a list of equipment, and we just prioritize. So this would be our most top priorities that we need for the next season. Certainly there's a list of equipment in here that was damaged through our last, but it's not including the one that burnt. That's still going through insurance.
Thank you. That's it on 6.8. Mr. Mayor, I got one more.
Anybody else in 6.8 before we move on? Go ahead, Mr. Gardy.
6.1, the outstanding council resolutions, and I might need some help with this, but it's a question to, you'll direct it to the best person for me, Mr. Mayor, but
Ask it to the clerk.
Mr. White?
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy CAO White. I'm looking at this list, and there seems to be, like, if I look at it briefly, is there like redundancy in here of some things that are kind of already being worked on? And or are there some things in, like, how do we clean this up further? If we wanted to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Staff are working to clean it up. It has been the topic of discussion. There was some cleanup done on it in this iteration, and we expect by the time the list comes back to you at the first meeting of July, you'll see further cleanup to it, as well as a number of items coming off the list because they've been reported out to council between now and then.
Thanks. On this list, can I ask one question? Just for some clarification, through you, Mr. Mayor, to, I'm thinking Mr. Ver. Is that okay?
Just ask the question.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Ver, top of the list, February 14th, International Marketplace. Preliminary study on possible development for an international marketplace on or near the waterfront. For example, one of those, is that not something that's kind of being looked at over the summer for when the cruise ships arrive?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, you're correct. That is something the Recreation and Culture staff are working on with future SSM as it relates to a night market there.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else on that? Councillor Gardy, are you done your questions on that agenda item?
I'm done, period.
Anybody else on that agenda item? Councillor Bezo-Allen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ver, and to probably help Mr. White with cleanup. So going through a lot of these issues, there's definitely things that I can see that are happening through future Sault Ste. Marie, such as the public art policy that's been outstanding since the 10th of August 2015. So is that something that's going to get rolled into the cultural plan, and then we're going to see all of these deliverables come to fruition?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, that's correct. That's what we envision. We'll probably have a few reports as it relates to the activities of future SSM that will be able to address a number of the items that are outstanding.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ver.
Okay, anybody else on the outstanding motions list? Seeing none, is that it for the consent agenda, Council? I think I've been around to all of you now. Councillor Shoemaker?
6.14, 6.15.
So we have 6.6, 6.7, and 6.14 pulled?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start with 6.6. Councillor Shoemaker, you asked for that to be pulled?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really, 6.6 and 6.
Actually, sorry, we have to vote on the
Can we
consent
do this one?
agenda.
I'm just going to put 6.14 in here as well.
Okay, so Madam Clerk's going to read the motion on the consent agenda.
Just got to update. So a motion by Councillors Scott and Dufour, resolved that all items listed under date April 15, 2019, agenda item 6, consent agenda, save and accept agenda items 6.6, 6.7, 6.14, 6.18, 6.20, 6.25, 6.26, and 6.28 be approved as recommended.
When did those other ones get exempted? Is that when I was out of the room?
They are the ones that you had conflicts on, and
Oh, okay. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so we're at 6.6 now?
All of those, for all of those being accepted, only one of them is a motion without a bylaw. The other ones we'll pull out on the bylaw side.
Okay.
Okay? So 6.18 is a motion by Councillor Scott and Dufour, resolved that the report of the Director of Engineering dated April 15, 2019 be received and that the 2019 road resurfacing program be approved.
Okay. Was that pulled?
That was pulled. That was pulled because of Councillor Nero's conflict.
Yeah, that didn't need to be pulled from consent.
It's because of the voting.
Oh. So because of our new voting portal, it has to be pulled now. Because, so, all in favor? Carried. This is all your fault, Councillor Shoemaker. Oh, I bet you there's only one of you that's going to say that. Okay, Madam Clerk, you can continue.
Okay, so we'll go to 8.2. That is also a bylaw. I mean, you can have that discussion now. The bylaws have been separated out.
What the clerk was wanting to do is getting rid of the one motion, and then we'll get into bylaws, and we'll just deal with each matter when it comes to the bylaw. We only have one motion left, Council, on the agenda that we haven't dealt with, so we'll deal with that motion first, then we'll go to the bylaws, which will give us the opportunity to deal with all the unconsented to motions or matters. So it's 8.2, Councilor Dufour's motion. If somebody can maybe run out and grab Councilor Dufour, that would be appreciated. Mr. Barrett can do it. You could be the motion in any event, Madam Clerk. We don't need to.
I've got a motion by Councillors Dufour and Hilsinger, whereas the costs associated with maintaining municipal services at their current level is likely to increase annually, and whereas City Council wants to ensure that the municipal levy is affordable and that the levy and any increases to it do not outpace the community's ability to pay, and whereas assessment growth is important to minimizing or neutralizing the pressures on the municipal levy, and whereas assessment growth has conventionally been understood and is usually discussed as new buildings and developments on previously unoccupied land, and whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie could have untapped assessment growth potential in old or existing neighborhoods where assessment values have declined or are in decline. Now therefore be it resolved that staff work with the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Centre to prepare a report that outlines and maps the areas of our community that have experienced assessment growth along with the areas of our community that have experienced assessment decline or stagnation over the past 2 assessment periods, in order that Council may have that information when it is considering infrastructure investments and prioritization.
Okay, Councilor Dufour. We'll let you speak to this motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually really excited about this motion. It takes something that I self-admit is very boring, looking at assessment classes and ratios. It can be dry stuff, but I think that there's some really exciting potential here, just in reframing the lens that we use to both to define growth and to look at how we understand growth, especially in budget time. And just to put this maybe in really simple terms, because all of the assessment weights are carried within the class, when we see growth at the end of the year, what that doesn't capture is divergence, so someone growing and someone declining, but them both offsetting, and us not seeing that in the data that we're looking at. And I think that by taking a closer look at that, it's going to help us to identify possibly where we can find assessment growth, especially at the lower end of our assessment base, because what's really important and what I think is really compelling about using this lens is that we can achieve the same downstream effects of growth without actually building anything new. And I think that as we start to dive into this and get a little more into the data that I hope staff can provide, I think it provides a really unique opportunity for this council to really decrease kind of the burden of municipal taxes without cutting spending, without cutting services, but by being a little more directed in how we're spending our money. So I hope I can have the support of my fellow councillors on this.
Thank you. Councillor Hilsinger, did you want to speak to it as somebody who seconded?
No, only to say that I'm quite excited about it as well, and I think that Councillor Dufour certainly explained the opportunity here in applying some strategy as we move forward. So thank you.
Councillor Dufour brought this matter to me a number of months ago, shortly after he was elected, and it's an important acknowledgement that something we should be discussing is that where in our residential class we might have growth in some area of the city, which have the effect of the property values of those homes going up. In some areas of the city, we see a decline, and it has the property value of those homes going down. So that actually has an adverse effect within the class, because you have the part of the class whose properties values are increasing, bearing more of the residential tax burden. So it's certainly worth looking at because it's infrastructure that's there, and we can maybe make investments that improve certain areas of the community and therefore have an effect on the assessment in those areas, which will have a broader effect on the class. So I think it's a great idea. I applaud the discussion, and I hope to be able to look at ways we can address this and implement some strategies. So I'm supportive. All in favor? Motion is carried.
Sorry, I gotta find my.
That will bring us to the bylaws once we've all voted, submitted our vote on this.
Do you want me to do the consented one first and then take the others, or the other way around?
Whichever way you feel keeps you most organized.
Okay, I'll do the consent motion first. That's a motion by Councillor Scott and Vezo-Allen that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date April 15, 2019, save and accept bylaws 2019-80, 2019-81, 2019-85, 2019-88, 2019-92, 2019-93, and 2019-97 be approved.
All in favor? Carried. Okay. So the first one, Madam Clerk.
Okay. 80 and 81 are the ones that both you and Councillor Shoemaker were conflicted on, and they have already been voted upon.
Okay.
2019-85 is the municipal capital facility, which has been postponed. 2019-97 is the Fort Creek Aqueduct, in which I believe Councillor Shoemaker has a conflict. A motion by Councillors Scott and Vezo-Allen resolved that bylaw 2019-97 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the contract between the City and Avery Construction Limited for the last two phases and improvements to the Fort Creek Aqueduct, which includes the reconstruction of the existing aqueduct that is located within the laneway on the east side of John Street between Edinburgh and Albert Streets. Contract 2019-1E be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
All in favor? Carried.
And bylaw 2019-92. A motion by Councillor Scott and Vezo-Allen resolved that bylaw 2019-92 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the City and Dr. Ken Coates, Holroyd Consulting, to assist in the development of innovative program and research to complement current work being undertaken by local companies, the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Centre and the Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
And that would be 6.6? Is that 6.6, Madam Clerk? I think it is.
I think so.
So we're on, that's 6.6, Councillor Shoemaker, you wanted that pulled. That's development of post-secondary new economy strategies. That's 6.6 is the Coates agreement. Councillor Shoemaker?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason I wanted this and 6.6 and 6.7 pulled is for the same reason, which is that they're single-sourced contracts. And there were also two others on the agenda that I didn't ask to be pulled because I think the reports from the risk management software and the finance software really laid out in good detail why it is that those software purchases needed to be single-sourced. I didn't get that same comfort from the development of the community youth welcome plan or the post-secondary new economy strategy. If, in fact, these entities that it is being recommended, we single-source the contracts to are the leaders in the field, I think that the RFP, a public RFP, will reflect that, and they will be successful in receiving the contract. If they are not, then we might get an even better proposal. So I don't support single sourcing these two contracts. I do realize that they are within staff's purchasing purview or mandate or whatever you call it, but the policy does require that they be approved by council if they're single sourced. So I would like to see these put out to RFP. I think they're good strategies to be pursuing, but I don't like the process that's currently being undertaken. I think a single sourcing should be an exception, not a standard operating.
Okay, we'll deal with them separately though, because it won't.
Yes, but my comments apply to both of them, and it's the reason I'll be voting against both of them individually.
Okay, so we'll just deal with 6.6. Are there any questions that any of the councillors have for staff on 6.6, which is the agreement with Coates, which is something that's being done in conjunction with Algoma University, I believe, Mr. Ver? Okay, Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, I'm not sure who to direct this to, but my question is just, perhaps we can just review the criteria or the rules behind single sourcing when it comes to procurement, purchasing. I'm hoping.
Well, I'm going to direct that to Mr. Ver. This instance, I imagine that the gentleman that would be most appropriate to answer that, he's not currently in the chamber, but Mr. Ver should have some explanation as to why these contracts are being single sourced and not tendered.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. Councillor Christian. The process, as we've talked to our procurement offices, essentially for single source, there are criteria that allow single source contracts to proceed. If it's up to 15,000, it can be approved by the head of procurement, and then up to 75,000 can be approved by the CAO for single source contracts. Again, under the prescribed rules of which event enables single source contracts to be permitted. That said, the agreements do come to council currently for approval. In this case, with the Dr. Coates agreement, as part of the future SSM strategy, we had growth, post-secondary growth, as identified as an overarching goal for the community strategy. And so we engaged Algoma University and Sault College to talk about strategic goals, and then in turn, they were interested to know where the EDC, the Innovation Center, where the ball was going and how they could contribute to that. So that led to the discussions around this particular area of interest, and they brought forward an expert that was familiar to Algoma University, that it works in this space, and has conducted a great deal of research in this area of innovation hubs, particularly in northern communities. And they felt he would be, the person that would help those two institutions plot out how they support our growth initiatives in those areas because of his background and his research. He did visit Sault Ste. Marie. We had meetings with him, the EDC, the Innovation Center. I think both sides were kind of sizing each other up. Did he want to do this work, and did we think he was the guy to do it? And everybody felt that he would be the right person to do that work. And that's why we used this method to procure. We felt he had unique expertise that would help the college and university in this regard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we'll deal with 6.6. Are there any more questions on 6.6? So we're going to have a vote. Do we need to read? Did you read the motion already? No. So did you read the motion? You did? Okay, so we're voting on 6.6. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Very good, that passes. So we will deal with 6.7. Councillor Shoemaker, you've spoken to this. If you had any further to say, I'd let you. No?
No.
Same comments. Any questions on 6.7, Council? Okay. Did I see a hand? Sorry. Go ahead, Councillor.
Shall I read them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to probably Mr. Anderson. So with this youth welcoming plan that I was bringing up earlier, the $44,000 contract through the Sioux Community Career Center through Global Friends, how was that determined that they would be sort of the best partner in developing this space? And my question was, is it a real bricks and mortar space? Is it a virtual space? That's not really clear in the description of the project.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Snow Allen. So, when we were assessing who would be best to take on developing a welcoming and community inclusion plan, which was criteria, it was actually a recommendation under the social equity pillar. We looked at who is currently providing services in this regard throughout the community, and Global Friends really stood out in terms of the amount of events that they were hosting throughout the community. What we're asking that group to do is to develop a comprehensive plan for youth in the community to welcome all newcomers. And they will be not only developing the plan, but also implementing it through programming and events. That's something that Global Friends has a great deal of practice at doing. They've hosted over 60 events in the community since, I believe, get my facts straight here, but I believe since 2012. And most recently, they had, the really strong focus in terms of cross-cultural events, which is also something that we're really looking at, trying to bring to the community in more fulsome capacity here, particularly with the work that we did with our federal immigration pilot project application. We are looking at, really trying to provide full services to newcomers to the community, whether they be from inside of Canada or outside of Canada. And that cross-cultural learning that and experiences that Global Friends brings was really unique in terms of the services that they provided in the community.
So again, is this going to be an actual space that youth can go to, or is it a virtual space? Like how does that?
Yeah, they will have actual space where the programming is actually supplied. And in conjunction with that, they are drafting an actual hard copy plan for how we actually welcome newcomers into the community.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
So, Councillor Shoemaker, you had a question on that same matter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Anderson, or Mr. Bear, whoever feels best able to answer it. If they are in fact the leaders that we see in this space, would they not be the successful proponent responding to an RFP anyway? So this is what, this is the trouble I'm having with this in the last agreement. Why wouldn't we put it out to an RFP and have them respond to it?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Shoemaker, I think in this case, we really felt like this group is the group that's undertaking this activity currently in the community and best placed to do this work. So yes, I would agree with you. If we did an RFP, they would probably be the eventual winner of that RFP. But in order to try and advance the work in a more rapid fashion, we were looking to engage them to develop this plan. And we didn't see another group, they kind of fit exactly what we were going to do. They were doing the work, so we felt it would be worthwhile to use the single source method in order to engage them to do this.
Okay, those are all my questions. My comments remain the same, which is that I don't agree with the process. If they are the best in the community to do the work, I think they'd probably be the successful RFP respondent in any event. So I think that this should go to RFP and let them test their mettle, so to speak. But I'll be voting against this.
Okay. Any other comments on this matter? We'll call a vote then. Did you read the
I haven't read the...
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Motion by Councillor Scott and Bezo Allen, resolved that bylaw 2019-93 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the City of Sault Ste. Marie Community Career Centre to develop and to implement a community-wide plan to create a safe, welcoming, and inclusive place for all newcomer youth, 15 to 29, as well as other minorities, including Indigenous and LGBTQQ two-spirited, be passed in open council this 15th day of April 2019.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, I think, council, that brings us to the end of the open agenda, but I'll let Madam Clerk confirm that.
Yep.
Did we miss one, Councillor Shoemaker?
I had a conflict.
Yeah, I think we...
Maybe that was dealt with.
I think we dealt, I think she might have lumped that. She didn't exempt that, so it was lumped it into the omnibus motion, I think.
I will go and check it. 88?
Yeah.
88.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did it under consent.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if my
Your exemption.
Your conflict will be
yes,
noted.
Will be noted.
Your conflict's noted.
Thank you.
And that's the way it always was, Councillor Shoemaker. It's the voting that, so that wasn't your doing, it was an administrative matter on the clerk's part.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Madam Clerk, if you
So
can
I have a motion by Councillors Gardy and Bezo Allen, resolved that this council proceed into closed session to discuss one item concerning instructions for negotiations and one item concerning labor relations. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Carried. Carried. Judy wants to get over here.